So I want to show you how I went about making a magazine cover. Now mine's a little a little bit sloppier because I only spent about an hour making this. You have significantly longer to make it, so I'll expect that you're able to really refine it. But I want to kind of take apart what I did. I used these magazines. I used these pictures for my magazine. So I was merging together some textures, some street art, this famous Banksy one here, and then I put it into Photoshop. So this is the finished magazine cover that I did. Again, I only did this in an hour, so that's why it's not as clean as I'd really like it to be, but it has all the main elements. It's got the masthead, it's got the from I to we. This is talking about utilizing design and art to help support things that matter to you. I've got the volume number and the issue number right up here, so I'm not putting a lot of emphasis. In fact, here, I can zoom over here. So I'm not putting a lot of emphasis on that because, again, that's not the information that I think is really, really interesting. Then I have my lead article. I've got things set up where I've got a font. I've adjusted the spacing between here. Remember, that's called leading. And then I've got the second level here that explains a little bit more about what that article is about. And I even threw in a little page number that's optional. Then down here, I have my additional cover lines. I'm using the same font size on each of these. I've got the second level by including the page numbers here. I've used an italic version of Futura and then a regular Roman version of Futura. I've got this a little bit larger, and then I played around with some effects. I've got the barcode here, and in the barcode, I've got the price set up as well as the finished graphic of things. So let me break this down on how I basically put this together. So again, I started first, let me turn all these things off, with finding some images and kind of figuring out what I wanted to create. So I used a brush to create a ragged edge here, almost like it was torn off. And then I clipped this texture of a wall to that. And then I played around with lightening it so that I could actually see the text that's underneath. I then took that same exact brick pattern and I put it on top of this. And then I stripped out the color using a black and white adjustment layer and then went in and changed the curves to lighten things up. Then I put that all together as a background in a group just to keep it clean so I could manipulate the rest of this because I've got a lot of other pieces that are in here. For this part, I did a mural. So I took the photos and adjusted them and then rotated them. And then each one of these has its own mask. You can kind of see what I did with those. But I was combining the stuff together and then I grouped those together and I put a mask on the group. So if you actually look here, oops, wrong button. There we go. So what this is I used a splatter brush from Brush Easy and went through and just kind of sprayed stuff around to make it feel like the edges were actually into the wall itself. So I have that piece set up. Again, this is pretty sloppy. I did this really fast, but you get the basic idea. Then I went through and kind of applied a couple other brushes on top of that. But as I'm going along, I'm keeping the folders easier to by having them in folders and groups. It's making it easier for me to navigate through my layers. I've also been naming them. I didn't name every single layer, but it definitely helps, especially as you add more stuff into Photoshop. So I've got the little splatters. I added a couple more on here just to kind of grunge it up a little bit. And then I took the wall, I took a black and white version of the wall and kind of darkened it and then played around with some blending modes just to try to bring back some of the texture to have that show up and make it look like the artwork was actually on the brick wall. And then I played around with the curves a little bit to add some detail up here. So that was essentially creating the main background. And that's the majority of the stuff for the photoshopping part. Then I had to go in and decide what to do with my masthead. So with my masthead, I went through and I tried several different variations. In fact, one of them was like this. And I didn't really care for I liked the red on the taking to the street, but I felt like the design matters part was definitely taking a second level approach where I couldn't see that one first. So then I experimented a bit with kind of overemphasizing the bright red. Again, I think I'd probably still mess with the color a bit because I'm not super happy with the overall appearance of that. But then in going through, I played around with a couple of these layer styles. Remember, these layer styles are ways to be able to do like drop shadows or put strokes on things. So it might be some way to make your masthead kind of pop out a little bit more. So then I grouped that all together in the masthead and I put it above everything. Then for the lead article, I broke this down. You can see here with my layers, I've broke this down with several different text layers. So on here, I've got the original piece, and I'd set this up so there was like a little bit of a shadow on it, and I played around with the blending modes. I then darkened the thing up, and then I added a second copy on here to give it this fake kind of drop shadow. I just shifted the text a little bit to the left and up with my arrow keys, and then added in the secondary line explaining a little bit more about that article. And I threw in the optional page number. Page number is a little small, might be a little too hard to read. That might be something I take off later. And then the last part on here for the text was including the cover lines. Remember, your cover lines are the 2 to 3 additional articles that would appear in this magazine. So in this little tear out that I did here, I thought, hey, on the inside of this, you could also see a spotlight on Shepherd Ferry, the emerging citizen designers, and then a spotlight on women using graphic design for social change. And then I added in a couple page numbers. Again, I'm keeping the font size consistent. I'm keeping the space between the two lines consistent, and I'm keeping the space between here consistent. Consistency is really what's going to make your document feel like you've actually touched every little element and it was done purposefully, I should say. And then I threw in the little barcode. I kind of angled it just to kind of go along with the same things as the brick. Again, that's just not necessarily required. And then up here, I tucked in the volume number and the issue number, and then I merged them all together. So this is similar to what we did with the UFO, with the mountain, and with the zombie tutorials that I gave you. I did Command Shift Option and the letter E to create the stamp. And then the last thing, this one doesn't have everything, so I'm going to actually do this one again. I'm going to convert this one to smart filters. That will let me edit the filter that I'm going to do here in a second. And I'm going to do the camera raw filter. I only do the camera raw at the very, very end, and I have to do it on a stamped layer. That means I actually went in. Okay, get started. Then I actually went in and did the Command Option Shift to smush all of these layers onto one layer itself. And then from here, I could play around with the different settings, kind of decide if I wanted a little less contrast, a little more contrast, bringing some of the details back in that were in the washed out areas. I'm just kind of experimenting a little bit with this. I can even go down here in the vibrance and kind of pop the colors a little bit more. I kind of like what that did with some of the rainbow colors up here. And then I can even go in and do some other things with, since this is kind of grungy, I could actually go in and play around with the clarity. So the clarity adds like a little bit more texture to it. The dehaze will also take some of that out. It'll actually get rid of some of the haziness. There's some vignetting. So there's a lot of different things you can experiment with. But if you're not as comfortable with some of these settings, you could come up here and choose an existing color profile. Now with these color profiles, there's a variety. It's basically like Instagram filters. It has a variety of different filters that you could potentially put on to help kind of pull some of the colors together. We'll talk later on about lookup tables. They use that in videography quite a bit, but also in photography where it's trying to adjust your colors. I can come down here to modern and kind of play around. Now you'll notice it does change, like it changed my lead article color. So the thing that's nice with having it set up as a filter or a smart filter is you're going to be able to go in and make adjustments to it later. Yeah, I'm kind of liking the look of that one. I can decrease the amount of the effect if I want, or I can increase it. And I can click OK. Now, what that did is that just created this smart filter here. So if I want to see, there's the before and there's the after. So it kind of brightens some things up a bit. I got some color balance back in here, or some colors that are a little bit more vibrant. So it just kind of popped it a little bit. Again, I would probably still continue to manipulate this and play around with it and see if there's other variations that I like better, or if I want to try a different font or something. But you can always save that as like version 3, version 4, version 5 to give you the freedom to be able to make some, do some experimentation. So that's what I'm looking for you to do. Not exactly like mine. Again, don't just copy this particular thing, but I wanted to show you kind of how I broke certain things down and wanted to re-emphasize the pay attention to all of the things that you put on the page, even the smallest things like your volume number or your price. You want to make sure everything feels purposeful and that you actually considered every element that you put onto this page.